Hello and welcome to episode 9 of our Better Riding series, brought to you by Bike Social and Honda Motorcycles UK. So this is a collection of videos and articles full of tips and hints, advice and even drills, all focusing on how every rider can be better and safer on the roads. And I mean every rider. So it doesn't matter whether you're a newcomer or you've been riding daily for 30 odd years. There's always something new to learn or just be better at. And to do so, we've teamed up with professional motorbike coach Mark McVeigh, an experienced rider coach, ex-MotoGP engineer, riding academy owner for over 20 years, and the inventor of Moto DNA rider training tech. Now, Mark has taught more than 10,000 riders to be better, smarter, and safer, and more confident. So who better to join us right now? Good day, Mark.
Hey, Michael, how are you going?
Fab. Yeah, very well, thank you. How are you?
Yes, not too bad, thanks. These videos are coming thick and fast now, so yeah, pretty busy.
Plenty of tips, aren't there? There's so many things that even I go out and learn. You know, at the weekend when I'm riding, I was riding this last weekend with my dad, and I was
Oh,
thinking about all the
nice.
things we've been looking at in the last couple of episodes as well. So, Mr. McVeigh, what are we talking about today?
Okay, well, today we're talking about brakes, but not just for slowing down. So, last week we spoke about hazard perception, and we talked about the we spoke about the staggering research data, on the loss of control in a corner. So today it's brakes and how they're not just for slowing down, essentially.
Okay, cool. Well, crack on. Where do we start?
Yeah, well, obviously front brake, that's where most of the stopping power is, and, that really controls our speed. But there's not so obvious benefits, like it helping with agility, direction, and grip. And then the rear brake, it's more about stability and fine tuning. So, to try and understand these not so obvious benefits, we need to understand a little bit more about, grip and steering geometry and how that kind of works on your bike.
Yeah, sure. How do you create grip?
Yeah, well, obviously we've got like the road surface, we've got the tire compound, the tire temperature and pressure, but all those kind of elements are outside the rider's control, once they're moving. So the main sort of contributor to grip is while the rider is moving, it is the weight or load on each tire. And you can see here on the front suspension, it's kind of compressed at 50 mil here, and you can see how big the tire footprint is. And then when we take that back, to when the fork's extended, the footprint gets smaller. So essentially when we brake or accelerate, the forks extend and the footprint is low like this. And then when we jump on the brakes, the grip transfers off the back tire to the front as the bike pitches forward, essentially.
Oh, fascinating. It's really cool, isn't it? So, you kind of in your brain, you think, oh, yeah, this is how these things work. And you take it for granted that that's how it works. And then it's only until you see something like that contact patch, you start to understand why and the impact. But you mentioned
Exactly.
steering geometry, didn't you, as well? What about that one?
Yeah, so steering geometry, there's a thing called the front wheel trail, which is nothing to do with trail braking. But essentially, if we look at this graphic, you can see there's a measurement from the steering head, which is hidden behind the fairing here, but it's in line with this. So that steering head, if you project the center line down to the ground, and this graphic's not quite right, it should be where the tire touches the ground. But just for to make it easier to see, we projected it down a little bit more. And then where the tire contact patch then intersects, that distance is called the trail. And in this case, it's 100 mil, which is really kind of typical of what you would see on a sports bike.
Oh, okay. Well, why do we need trail then?
Well, it's just one of those things, motorcycle designers, they use this trail as a kind of compromise to give stability. So the longer that trail is, the more stable the bike is. Like on a cruiser, it could be, 140 mil, very stable. And then on a sports bike, maybe 100. But the thing is that the front wheel trail, when it gets smaller, the bike's more agile. And when it gets bigger, the bike's slower to turn and more stable. But it's also dynamic, so it changes with your suspension movement. And when the trail gets smaller, it's directly proportional to the bike's agility or stability. And if we run this graphic, you can kind of see that the trail's kind of bouncing around a little bit. But if we get to the end here, you can see, you know, when the forks are compressed, like I say, it's 100 mil there, and then when the forks are compressed, sorry, it's about 80. And then so that kind of changes. And when it's small like that, that makes the bike turn and makes it more into a kind of sports bike, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Oh, wow, that's pretty cool. Is there anything else that we need to know about trail?
And that's probably about it for trail. We'll dig in a little bit more later. But the kind of next thing to understand is, you know, kind of speed equals the radius. And if we look at this video here, you can see, you know, the more speed that you have, the more radius you need for the same lean angle. So that's really good to understand. So more throttle equals increasing radius and the bike running wide. So in the next one here, we've got a guy coming in and kind of does that. You know, we're practicing in a controlled environment, which is great. So then he, you know, reduces the throttle and that tightens your line. And then if you add the brake, this is where the brake comes in, that'll tighten your line even more. So when you think about the, you know, what we're talking about, the problem of this loss of control in corners, if you can't precisely control your speed in a corner, then you're actually not controlling that corner radius. So, you know, you're a little bit out of control in the corners if you can't manage that. And then if you add in a surprise, you know, you get a bit of gravel or there's a car across the white line, or often is the case, you know, you enter the corner too fast, you know, you'll drop to the level of your training. So it's really important that you practice this and, you know, in the controlled environment and try and get a better understanding, you know, of what you can do in the corner.
How does that then help with the problem, Mark? That sort of loss of control, specifically in the corners, obviously.
Yeah, exactly. Let's go back and examine that problem. So we understand how we can get grip. We understand how we can adjust the steering geometry, and we understand that speed equals radius, okay? So why are riders running wide and crashing in corners, you know? So we want to look at kind of, you know, what are we teaching riders? You know, whenever they get the kind of licensing, you know, they're taught to, you know, do most of the braking before the corner and then kind of release the brake and then lean in and then kind of accelerate through the rest of the turn. Now, that's fine for novice and inexperienced riders because they're going relatively slowly, but as riders kind of get more experience and confidence, that their speed is increasing, and that's kind of where the traditional training habit starts to unfold, because that you're having what's the opposite of what's needed in the corner, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. Yeah. So, but what exactly is happening with that more sort of traditional technique that novices are being taught?
Yeah, so essentially, you know, they're leaning in and they're applying the throttle. So that takes the weight off the front tire. So they're getting less grip. And then because the forks are extending as well, then the bike's less agile and it wants to run wide. So you're essentially fighting the bike. You're trying to steer the bike with the handlebars while, you know, you're using the throttle. And that's kind of why the bike wants to run wide in the corner.
Seems a bit counterintuitive to me, but I suppose maybe you got to start somewhere and then develop as you gain more experience. But is there a definition of the best technique for optimum cornering? How about that?
Yeah, well, trial braking's often spoke about, and you know, that's really to carry some brake pressure or even kind of engine braking after you start to turn your bike, and then as you lean the bike more into the corner, you reduce or trail off that front brake pressure.
Oh, okay. Why would we then use, of course this is all about braking, but why would we use trail braking on the road? What are the advantages?
Well, I guess, you know, if you think about cornering, it's all about understanding and maximizing the grip on your tires at the right moment. So that trail braking is kind of a technique that carries all the benefits of braking for a turn into the steering phase. It allows your bike to steer quicker with more grip. And done well, trail braking, you know, it gives you more control and stability through the corner. And then the other thing to think about is this your speed in the middle of the corner is much the same as a traditional technique.
All right. Yeah, I get it. I'm beginning to get it. Have you got any more detail about what, the sort of the more precise things that are happening through that the cornering stages?
Well, yes, I do. I've got the pretty awesome animation, and I'll let it run through, and then we'll jump in and dissect it, spend a bit of time trying to understand the detail. So you can see, right-hand corner, and we have the different phases coming along the straight, then we're braking, a little bit of trail braking, and then a neutral or maintenance throttle in the middle of the corner before we accelerate out. And you can also see here that we've got we've got sort of G diagram up here. So you can see the braking force. And then as we lean, then that turns into this kind of trail braking. And then we're off the brakes and sort of neutral throttle phase. And then we start accelerating out. So it kind of gives you that information there. But if we roll this back and spend a bit of time just bringing it in step by step. So obviously we're coming along the straightaway. And then we have our braking phase. So you can see the start of the braking here in the GG diagram. So we're slowing down. And typically, we should be going at a speed appropriate for our skill. You should be able to stop within the distance you can see on your side of the road. That's a riding fundamental. So experienced riders, they'll typically use about 30% of the brake performance, which is roughly 0.3, 0.4 G. And that's enough force to, load that tire, increase your grip, compress your forks, and reducing that front wheel trail, which improves the turning performance. So you're getting everything that you need for the corner, and you've still, because you're only using 0.3, 0.4 G, you've still got plenty of grip in reserve, if that makes sense. And then as we get a bit closer to the corner, we start thinking about turning in. So we're then starting to reduce the brake pressure, and you can see this in the GG diagram as well. But we don't completely release the lever. So we're reducing front brake pressure as we add lean angle, okay? So you can't have, full braking and full lean. So as we slow down, then we are allowing the bike to turn on a smaller radius, still with the front forks compressed. That bike wants to turn tighter. So if you remember, the speed equals the radius. So the slower speed then gives us that tighter radius, and this is what we need, because we're talking about going around the corner, okay? And then that brings us into the next phase, which is kind of the middle of the corner. So, we're off the brake at this stage, and you can see in the GG diagram, there's the longitudinal G it's virtually stopped now. And this kind of balances the weight distribution of the bike. So you've got grip on the front and the back tire, and you're on that kind of neutral throttle or maintenance throttle. So that gives you the kind of neutral steering, and you're maintaining your corner speed until the exit phase. And this is kind of where we need to be patient, okay? You have that neutral throttle, and then if you open the throttle too soon, then, speed equals radius. So then that'll increase the corner radius, and the bike will want to run wide. So we have to be patient. And then at this stage, we're heading into the corner exit phase. So we can see clearly around the corner. We're happy with our speed and our direction. And then we start accelerating. So as we accelerate, then the bike naturally wants to run wide, and you can see that that's going to, go to your exit point. We add radius, and, remember speed, more speed equals a bigger turning radius for a given lean angle, if that makes sense. And then we're accelerating away, and off we go, finish this sequence. So you might have to watch this a few times just to understand it, but it's very powerful graphic that explains, how we should be trail braking on the road.
Yeah, it's fascinating. Mark, what I found quite interesting about that is that whole braking phase. And if you're traveling much faster, you've then got to work out, haven't you, the sort of the dynamics and what happens with the bike, with specifically the front brake. I mean, in that example, are we talking about front brake or a combination of both, or?
Yeah, well, we'll talk a little bit about that later, but essentially the front brake will give you the most weight distribution and give you the most benefits, because it's compressing the forks, it's putting that weight on the front. Rear brake too, but generally, the front brake does the lion's share
We've heard a lot, certainly when I watch motorcycle racing, I've heard a lot about trail braking, but on the road, are there any other benefits to trail braking?
Yeah, I mean, it's fun. That's a big thing. We don't want to be the fun police. The trail braking is fun, but it's also safe. And I think one of the main benefits is that, it helps you react quickly to like an unexpected hazard in a corner. And, when we look at these stats of loss of control, we're talking about a bit of gravel. It could be you've entered the corner a wee bit too quick, or there's a car somewhere or some other vehicle that's kind of surprised you. So if a hazard appears in the middle of the corner or the bend tightens up, you actually already are on the brakes. You have brake pressure, you have your forks compressed, the bike is more agile, and you have more grip on your front tire. So, the bike feels more planted with trail braking, and it gives you that sort of increased, front end feel and confidence. And it is especially useful for tighter turns, with a higher kind of approach speed or downhill hairpins. But trail braking, it is an advanced skill, and you should practice in a controlled environment until that skill is intuitive and becomes second nature before you want to use it on the road. And you won't use trail braking in all corners. Rolling off the throttle might be enough to have the correct entry speed and give some weight transfer benefits.
Yeah, of course, and there's engine braking too involved with that. And I know we talked about in the hazard perception episode last time about almost not preloading the brakes, but being ready to get on the brakes because of that 2 second gap that we talked about with over that particular distance.
Exactly.
But come on then, we talk. Should we move on to the rear brake now?
Yeah, the rear brake. I mean, a lot of riders ignore the rear brake. We at my school, over the last 20 years, we've went through 10,000 riders, so I see a lot of riders, and a lot of people just ignore it. But the rear brake's super useful, and I mean, obviously, it doesn't stop the bike as quickly as the front, but it kind of helps the bike remain composed. That's the way I kind of use it, as a sort of fine tuning to keep the bike sort of more stable. And obviously, low speed control is a big one. Using the rear brake with some throttle helps with the balance, because you're kind of, with U-turns or slow speed maneuvers. That's super useful. Downhill braking's a big one. The rear brakes kind of flattens the bike out and keeps the bike from pitching forward. And, if you're going downhill, that can be something you want to avoid. And it works even better if you apply the rear brake just before the front. And that's a technique, that I learned a long time ago. So it'll, be good for people to go and try that out. If you haven't heard of that one, just a little bit of rear brake before you go to the front, and it makes the bike kind of flatten at the back and then before the front comes down. So super useful. And then also, like, I use the rear brake a lot in corners. So, if I essentially trail brake most of the time. So I'm on the front brake, and then when I come off the front brake and I'm on the neutral throttle phase, I actually keep the rear brake on in some occasions if the corner's tight. Just a little bit of rear brake pressure, and it can help like tighten your line as you accelerate out. So I'm actually on the throttle and a little bit of rear brake, and as I have that exit phase, and it really helps to tighten your line. So that's another little trick to try out.
I absolutely agree, and I'm just the same. Yeah, I've been doing this job. I've been testing motorcycles for, I don't know, 15 years or so. But and it's only, yeah, it's only during that time where I've ridden with other, with professionals who've been doing it perhaps a bit longer, and they were talking about the merits of using your rear brake, particularly in sort of faster sweeping corners or not particularly tight corners, and how it benefits. We could talk a lot about thumb brakes in motorcycle racing as well, how you can control wheelies. That's probably a bit too advanced. Speaking of advanced, we live in an era where motorcycles seem to be getting more and more technology, more and more equipment, and brains. IMUs every single year we get new motorbikes. But how is braking technology advancing?
Yeah, that's super interesting. The tech is moving so fast now. Obviously, we've got ABS. That's been around for a long time, and that really is fantastic. It's a no-brainer for a road bike. We just don't know what the surface is going to be. And, I've got my adventure bike with the knobbies on, and, often the road's a bit slippier than if you're in between the off-road sections, you're on the tarmac, the knobbies aren't the greatest. So the ABS, it's definitely helped me a few times there. So it just reduces that risk, So that's really fantastic tool. And then this cornering ABS, that seems pretty amazing too. Essentially you can apply full brake pressure as you're going around the corner, and the bike will just track around the corner. And the interesting thing with that, though, is that the rider still has to use the brakes. And if the rider, has a fear of the front brake, which is often the case, and especially in a corner. So at the school, we do cornering drills, corner avoidance drills, where we teach riders to brake and swerve in a corner. And most of the riders, 90% of them can't do the drill, especially in a left-hand corner. And if anybody knows why, tell me in the comments and I'll be very impressed. But yeah, so the rider still has to brake. So you've kind of, again, got the high-tech bikes, but the low-tech rider, because you got to know how to use the tech. And then braking technology, I guess, the crazy stuff coming in now is this autonomous braking. So, the bike is braking by itself. And, we have done a bit of research on this and worked with, motorbike OEMs and stakeholders around this technology. And we're kind of saying, well, hey, the bike's capable of stopping it over 1G, but if you apply 1G, the rider will not be attached to the bike. They're not expecting it. So you really do need to understand the ability of the rider, for these systems. But I think, there's companies building systems for the different manufacturers, and those manufacturers have got kind of different settings that they set the bike at, and it's only a fraction of what the bike can stop at. So maybe if it's enough to start slowing the bike down, and then the rider kind of wakes up. But, in my mind, I think that it's a kind of step too far if the rider has to rely on the bike to control itself. That's really, that's kind of where I sit on it. But
I tend to, there's some manufacturers out there, there's some bikes out there that've got this autonomous braking. Now, whether that's autonomous cruise control, because my car, and I've ridden bikes where if you're set on cruise control, it will, and the the vehicle in front of you slows, the bike will slow and maintain that set gap. And I like that. Once you get used to it, it's a bit spooky to begin with, but once you get used to it, I like it because it doesn't, while it's kind of, it's doing actions for you, it's doing them in such a subtle way that it makes it a lot safer. And I trust in their systems. But I think that, we've spoken in previous episodes about the lack of use of a front brake or lack of pressure of the front brake in accidents. And that, you've got statistics that sort of prove how little those people involved in accidents are applying the front brake. And that's, well, again, we've mentioned it time and time again about down to sort of lack of practice, lack of understanding of how brilliant these systems are. And you've got to be able to trust your front brake, especially in those kind of incidents or situations where, grab hold of that front brake, stamp down on that rear brake pedal, and it could well, benefit you. But anyway, we could we could go on and on and on and on about this. But do you want to just sort of summarize what we've been talking about, Mark?
Yeah, well, you're spot on there, Michael. I mean, it's really understanding your bike's essential, so especially if you're going to do, practice corner maneuvers, like trail braking, it's got to be intuitive, especially if you need to avoid an accident on the road one day. But like most skills, the more structured training and practice you do, the better rider you'll become. And we always talk about this 10,000 hours towards mastery. And, and the other thing is more skill equals more fun. So it's not a chore. It should be good fun,
You absolutely nail on the head there. We've said it before, we'll say it again. The better you are at something, whether it's a hobby, whether it's anything else in life, the more you are going to enjoy it. Mark, look, fantastic 100%. Level of detail again. And there's plenty for me and for everyone else to go away and practice. I'm pretty excited about upping my level of trail braking. But what are we talking about next episode?
Yeah, next week is emergency stop. So how to nail your emergency stop every time.
Okay. Oh, well, that's perfect. It's a great lead on then, isn't it? Brilliant. Mark, thank you as always. I'll let you get on with the rest of your time.
No worries. Cheers, Michael.
Awesome. Thank you also to Honda Motorcycles UK. Mark and I will be back next time. In the meantime, don't forget to check out our other Better Riding episodes in the YouTube playlist. I've also got 3 more places of interest to let you know about. Firstly, search for Bennetts Bike Club. Now, that's our new community website, bit like Facebook, bit like a forum, all kind of mushed together, but with some brilliant expert advice on any kind of motorcycle-related questions that you may have. And a similar offering can be found on our private Facebook group. That's called Bennetts Bike Social. Come and find us there. Join us. And finally, how about becoming a Bike Social member, which entitles you to access over 200 different motorcycle apparel, clothing, and training discounts? Just search Bike Social membership. You get it for free. You get a year's worth of membership for free if you insure your bike directly with Bennetts. You can still become a member, though, if you don't. That's just £6 a month or £60 a year. All right. Thanks for being with us. Don't forget to leave all your comments below and subscribe to not miss out on another episode. And we'll see you next time. Cheers.
Honda Motorcycles are supporting this series because safety is one of their key business pillars, and their quest for safety inspires their innovations in products, technology, and education, which is why they're committed to achieving 0 traffic fatalities involving Honda mobility products worldwide by 2050.